Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get started today, just want to send a shout out, hugs and love to Don's family. As many of you are aware, he passed away a year ago on the 23rd. And so take a time to remember him. Pray for his family because grief isn't linear. There are up days, there are down days, and when you have someone who played such a big role in your life, those ebbs and flows will come. So keep his family in your prayers. So let's get into it, shall we? Today we are talking about, let me move my mug, Crooklyn, Spike Lee joint. This came out in 1994, which I believe was right after Malcolm X came out. This film was the story was written by his sister Joie Lee. She sold the story to Spike, and then together Joie, and their brother Cinque tweaked it for film. And what you have today is the story that they co-created. Spike Lee, of course, was the director for the film, and you'll recognize some of his trademark, his signature film moves where, you have your character moving forward and the background just seems to be not quite in focus to where it's supposed to be. And also there's a scene where he switches the width of the lens to kind of emphasize the discomfort that the main character is feeling through those particular scenes. We'll get to that. But how is this story different from any of the other Spike Lee films? The other films are about adult things, quite frankly. And to me, they feel a little bit more in your face as far as the messaging, which usually amounts to you gonna see black folks. Again, that's my point of view. This was a more gentle story, and it was about a family, a typical black family in Brooklyn in 1974. That's an interesting time period, and you might be going, okay, what's so interesting about 1974? It was a time where a lot of things were shifting. A lot of people were getting and settling into, and I'll say marginalized communities were getting and settling into a new set of rights. 1974 is just after the last wave of the Great Migration. And so, if you know your history, there was a period of time where black people left the South and they headed to cities in the North because they were trying to get away from Jim Crow, outright blatant racist oppression, and they were looking for better opportunities for their families. And so the overall period of the Great Migration was from 1910 to 1970, but it happened in two waves. The first wave was what I just described to you immediately after antebellum South, what have you. That started 1910 to 1930. It was a brief break in there, and then from 1940 to 1970, the flight of black folks from the South began again. So in 1974, you see this family settled in Brooklyn. Yes, they have ties down south, and that comes up about halfway through the story. So when we meet the Carmichael family, which is played by Delroy Lindo, uh, and Alfre Woodard as the parents. Um, it's a normal day. All of the kids are outside playing. It's summertime, school's out. Kids are running up and down the street playing tags and beating up on each other. This the typical stuff that happens with kids. But it's an easygoing feeling. You're pulled into the scene, and again, everything about what's happening feels absolutely normal. There's no big event, no culminating thing that happens that shakes up this peacefulness on this city block in Brooklyn. And so you meet the Carmichael family. I mentioned the parents. Um, Alfre Woodard plays Carolyn. Delroy Lindo plays Woody. And then you have the children, Troy, which is the only girl in the family, Clinton, Wendell, Joseph. Yeah, Joseph and Nate. Yeah, so 5 kids all together. Ooh, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And so you come in and you start to fall in to the dynamic. You know, the older brother, of course, he's always being the bully and has all the privileges. And there's a certain amount of privilege and preference that Troy has, being the only girl. The only girl and the second oldest. There's a certain amount of responsibility that she takes on for her younger siblings, and you see that especially later in the movie. And so Carolyn is a school teacher, and she's made the decision to support her husband, who has said, you know what, I've done the work thing, but I really want to pursue my music. I really think I can make it big. I'm writing my music, I'm creating. And so she said, all right, fine, I'll go ahead and support this. But we still got to maintain the household, which means I have to go back to work. And so back to work she went. This caused a bit of a problem because him being the creative person, he forgot about some important things about paying bills and not overdrawing accounts. And so they had their little dust ups about that. And when he forgot to pay the electric bill, they had to figure out something to do with the 5 kids, because it was going to be a couple of weeks before they could have the money to pay the bill. And there's nothing worse than living in a brownstone in the summertime with no AC, 5 children, and an angry tenant upstairs, who, by the way, the tenant was Isaiah Washington. He was playing Vic, who was a Vietnam vet. And so they decide to take their family down south for the summer and visit some family members. And so they dropped Troy off with Aunt Song and her daughter. And Aunt Song, as they describe in the movie, she's kind of the rich aunt. And so they said, you know what? She has a daughter. You can go down and hang out with her and, you know, get some culture and you know, all of that stuff. And then they went and took the boys down to other relatives and eventually made their way back. But they left Troy down so she could have a good time, and parents made their way back home. And she saw a different way of life. She didn't exactly like it. Again, this is where you see that screen tighten. The picture gets real narrow and tight to show that Troy was not entirely comfortable in this space. Aunt Song was a very Christian woman. I'll describe it that way. You know, little girls had to have frilly socks and dresses on, and Troy, being a city girl, she was used to being rough and tumble, wearing jeans and basic t-shirts. Again, that's what her mother could afford. Girls had to have frilly pajamas and slumber parties and all of this stuff, and Troy wasn't so into it. This was a slower pace of life, and eventually, when she had enough of it, she asked her parents to come back home. Um, they deal with a lot of things in this film. Again, that family aspect. Um, Carolyn gets sick and eventually dies in the film, and so you see Troy kind of navigating her way through all of these things, realizing, hey, we don't always have money, and mom and dad fight, and he's not always here. What does this mean for the family? And when things hit the fan and Carolyn got upset with Wendell, she put him out. And so Wendell would come back and he'd check on his baby girl, and they had their own little thing. Um, but the thing that you couldn't escape in this film was the love of family. By the end of the film, after Carolyn died, you see Troy, she grows up like that. Now she's the one who's standing out on the porch and hollering for her brothers to come home because it's dinner time. She takes on the responsibility of basically being the woman of the house in every way except for paying bills, of course. And you also see her father, Wendell, kind of shift and come back to the responsible person. It's an uncomfortable place for him. You get the sense of that because he realizes that, hey, I can't just go out here and be creative. I got to be creative about making sure bills get paid and these children get taken care of because my wife is gone. And so it all falls on me. So I have to get creative about figuring out how I can continue to do my music. Um, this is as much as it's a family story, it's a coming of age story, and it's one where it's not a typical coming of age story, because a lot of times, frankly, we see these stories centered around white kids, and a lot more of these stories centered around boys. So this was a shift to see a black girl centered in a coming of age story. And again, a coming of age story that didn't involve anybody getting pregnant, anybody getting shot, anyone having to bail anyone out of anything. This was, again, the normalizing the black family unit. I don't think I mentioned some of the other things. I mentioned it took place around the Great Migration, but some of the other things that were happening during that time, women were just getting I did mention that, women getting the right to have their finances, establish their finances. There's a scene where Carolyn lets Wendell know, oh, I opened my own checking account. Just 10 years before, that wouldn't have been possible for her to do without her husband's permission. And so you see all of the changing and shifting and the way the world is moving forward around them, and they settle into it. I was but a wee bairn at that time, 75, around that point. And so I wasn't very aware of the world until a few years later. But that looked like the world that I grew up in for the most part. And so it's always a refreshing movie to go back to. Definitely a classic film. I would say you can watch this with your kids. This is a Spike Lee film that you can watch with the kids and the grandkids and reminisce and go, oh yeah, I remember when we used to do that. Y'all don't know nothing about that. You couldn't handle that now. We can have those conversations with the younger generation. You can watch this anywhere that you can get streaming. And by anywhere, I mean anywhere that you're going to rent. So Vudu, YouTube, iTunes, you can download this movie. I give it 10 out of 5 stars. I know someone there is going, Nikay, that's not good math. Just roll with it. Just roll with it, okay? Um, Again, highly recommend. Great coming of age story. Great historical story if you want to run down that rabbit hole like I did. So definitely check that out. Okay, that's all I have for you today. We will be back next week with another great movie. Keep your eyes on the Facebook page because that's where we tell you what's coming up next. Make sure you like, subscribe, go follow the Movies That Move We page over on Facebook. Tell a friend. Tell a friend. Make sure that you also follow our pages. Nicole hasn't been with us in a minute, but follow her page, Nicole DeCandice, NicoleDeCandice.com. Type in those 2 words in that order. You will find Nicole. Don't forget, check out Don's book. Books, I should say. Type his name in on Amazon, Don Miskel, Miskel. Grab a copy of any one of his books. He's a fantastic writer. And if you're bored, you can check out my page, Nikay Writes, WRITES, Nikay Writes at wordpress.com. You know what? I should probably tell you how to spell my first name, right? Nikay, Nike, writes.wordpress.com. So thank you for joining me, and until next time,